Hi, I'm Michael Stittle.
And I'm Nik Nanos.
Nik, welcome to Trendline. I just before we get started, you have kind of some exciting news, I guess. You were in Germany at the Frankfurt Book Fair.
Yes, I was honored to be part of the official delegation with the Governor General to go to Germany because I volunteer at Atlantic Brücke, which is a Canada-Germany dialogue organization that's a nonprofit. So I went on the trip, I was in the motorcade, so I was quite surprised to be invited, but I'm in a motorcade, which is kind of cool. But what was even more important and really great to see was how well received the Governor General was. Germans came out, it's kind of like lining up along the road to see the Governor General. She went out and kind of, shook hands and talked to people. Actually, I shouldn't say she did not shake hands. She went out and talked to folks and it was very well received. So it was a great learning experience. It was an honor to join the Governor General, and it was great to see how strong and healthy Canada-German relations are.
That's great. So on today's show, we got a pretty packed show. We're going to look at which parties have momentum post-election, and I've personally found the answer very surprising. We're going to do a provincial check-in with Alberta to see how Premier Jason Kenney is doing. And then later after our break, we're going to talk about COP26, the UN climate conference in Glasgow. But first, Nik, we're a few weeks away from the election now. Actually, maybe longer. I can't even. I've totally lost track of time. but how are the parties doing?
Well, it's interesting. In the latest Nanos tracking that we just released a day or two ago, we have the Liberals at 30.8%. They're down 2 points. Conservatives at around 30. They're down 4 points. New Democrats at 21.6. They're up 4. Bloc 7. People's Party still doing as well as they were doing during the election at 6. Green Party at 3. So why don't we say, we always wonder, is there going to be or will there be a honeymoon after an election? Many times there are. Why don't we just say zilch, nada, no honeymoon for the Liberals. They're down a little bit. And if there's one party, I think the two surprising things, first of all, the New Democrats are up 4 points. This while Jagmeet Singh is talking about what he'd like to accomplish in the next parliament. And People's Party, maybe more than just a blip. They're at 6%, which is basically their level that they registered in the last election, and still a force to be reckoned with on the political landscape.
So just going back to the NDP for a second, I mean, you said that Jagmeet Singh is talking about what he wants to accomplish in Parliament. So obviously that's an effective strategy for him.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's positive. It's about the future, and it basically shows that, he has an agenda that he wants to try to achieve and to put pressure on the Liberal government. And, the other thing is, you asked about momentum, those Conservative numbers down 4 points. This, while Aaron O'Toole is dealing with, I don't know what we wanted to call it, but controversy, the issue of whether MPs, all Conservative caucus members, and what their vaccination status. So just another distraction. It's kind of like this vaccination thing. This keeps dogging Aaron O'Toole, and his numbers go up, and then all of a sudden he starts talking about vaccinations, and then kind of starts to go back down. So he's still dealing with that, and it's a vulnerability, at least when we look at the polling numbers. And for Justin Trudeau, basically no momentum, no honeymoon, no nothing coming out of this election.
So I'm curious about that, because with the vaccine mandate, Nik, I mean, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is using that as a political wedge issue, obviously against O'Toole, but it doesn't seem to be having much of an impact on his own numbers.
Yeah. Well, when we ask Canadians who would make the best prime minister, Justin Trudeau is at around 30%. I think there's only about a 1 point. He's down about 1 point. O'Toole, the big movement is O'Toole. He's at 21. He's down a full 6 percentage points. And this speaks to what we were talking about on the vaccination front. Hasn't been a boost for Trudeau because it's already baked into his numbers. But for O'Toole, him talking about vaccinations hasn't been good for the Conservative ballot numbers. Definitely hasn't been good for O'Toole's personal brand. Singh at 21, Bernier at around 6.5, Blanchette at 3.5, Paul at 1.1. So on the brand leader front, the big change, O'Toole taking a little bit of a hit. This guy probably wants to change the channel. And why don't we he probably is like, they probably are, in their meetings are saying, let's not use the V word, vaccinations. Every time they talk about vaccinations, it doesn't seem to be a clear win for them. And it creates a little bit of wiggle in the numbers, so to speak.
On the topic of vaccines and the pandemic, let's move over to Alberta, where Premier Jason Kenney facing a lot of criticism for his government's handling of the pandemic, and on Canada Day when he sort of opened up the province, and we've seen what happened. So we have these new numbers from Innovation Research Group, just saying that something like half or more than half of Albertans are critical of or dissatisfied with how Kenney's handled things.
Yeah, it's kind of like a world of political pain for Jason Kenney. And we have to remember, let's face it, Jason Kenney under Stephen Harper was a political star and darling of the Conservative movement. Very successful cabinet minister, managed to reach out to ethnic communities and help build that Harper winning coalition, and a lot of hope and positiveness when he transitioned into provincial politics, to be the leader of the new United Conservative Party, and then to win an election. A lot of hope there, but man, oh man, this pandemic has just pummeled his personal brand. In the survey by Innovative Research Group, when Albertans were asked about whether they approve or disapprove of the handling of the outbreak, the COVID-19 outbreak, a whopping 68% disapprove to one extent or another, while only 20%, or 1 out of every 5, approve. And that's not good. And when you think about 20%, having a positive view of how Jason Kenney and his government's handling, 20% is not enough to win an election. That's for sure. It's enough to lose an election. And I think right now what we have is a government that at the beginning of its mandate started off quite strong, and there was a lot of positive views and hope. But right now, I think we have to say that it's definitely politically on the ropes right now.
So are we looking at a situation, Nik, where Jason Kenney may be forced to step down, that the party may be looking for another leader?
I'll tell you one thing about Conservatives in Alberta. They want to be winners. They like to be winners. And if they're not winners, they're very, very, very grumpy. And, not only is Jason Kenney dealing with a grumpy electorate, he's dealing with a grumpy caucus and also a grumpy party. And there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on Jason Kenney to try to turn things around, his personal numbers and also the ballot numbers, because on both of those fronts, it's pretty it's pretty grim news. Basically, when you look at all the polling right now, at least in Alberta provincially, when we're looking at Jason Kenney and also the ballot numbers.
Now, when NDP leader Rachel Notley won, I think some people saw that as sort of a blip on the radar, an unexpected event. But how popular is she now in Alberta?
Well, it was an unexpected event. In fairness, no one really expected Rachel Notley and the NDP to unseat the Conservatives. So, but the question is, could she make a comeback? And in this same survey by Innovative Research Group, we when I say we, I'll say my friends, Greg Lyle at Innovative Research Group, when he tested on the favorability of Kenney and Notley, you can see that Kenney's favorability was only at around 20% to one extent or another. Around 2 out of every 3 had some sort of unfavorable impression of him. Notley, 46% favorable to one extent or another, and only 35% unfavorable. So right now, her personal brand is stronger than Jason Kenney's brand. And if you remember, looking at the numbers, even when Rachel Notley lost the election, her personal brand still wasn't that bad. And I think for a lot of Albertans, they liked her. They weren't keen on the New Democrats just because of for historic reasons. But she came out, even though she was not even technically the loser, she lost the last election. Her brand was a little better, or is much better than her party's brand.
Fascinating stuff. And we're going to take a short break now, Nik, but after that, we're going to talk about the environment in COP26.
Super.
And we're back. Nik, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Glasgow, Scotland for COP26, the UN climate conference, where a lot of the world leaders were trying to hammer out deals to cut greenhouse gas emissions. How is the environment as a top issue of concern now for Canadians?
Well, before the pandemic, it was the hands down slam dunk top issue of concern. Before the pandemic, at the tail end of 2019 and in January 2020, before the pandemic really hit. But the pandemic knocked it off the radar. And when we look at the trend, what we can see is a little bit of a comeback for the environment, factoring the margin of error statistically tied with the pandemic. I think the pandemic or coronavirus is at around 15.5%. Environment has 13.4. The margin of error is 3.1. So right now, environment is among the top issues on the radar for Canadians. So this COP26 meeting, very timely, because puts it on the radar in terms of what Canada's plan is, what the world plan is for dealing with the environment that everybody cares about.
And this is right after Trudeau shuffled his cabinet and put Guilbeault as the new environment minister. And he was a former Greenpeace activist in Quebec. He's got a pretty strong environmental activism record. I mean, obviously Trudeau is going all in on the environment, and how are Canadians responding to this?
Well, it's pretty clear that he's doubling down on the environmental file because the new Minister of the Environment has a very clear public track record and position on the environment. And you know what, Michael, this is be kind of like, let's take a top union leader and make them the Minister of Labor. What would people say about that? They would assume that the government had a particular approach or things that they wanted done on the file, and they put someone who already has a very clear view on that. So putting Guilbeault in the environment is a big signal that the Trudeau government is doubling down on the environment. But you know what? The Trudeau government will be judged based on what it does and what it can accomplish. And you know what? There's still a significant proportion of Canadians that, yes, they want action on climate change, but they're still worried about the economy and jobs and want to try to balance that.
And in terms of an international climate conference like COP26, how do Canadians respond to that? Do Canadians think it's effective, especially when you have China and Russia absent?
Yeah, well, the thing is that the reality is that when you crunch the number, China is one of the top emitters of greenhouse gases, and then after that, the United States. And when big economies like China and Russia are not fully engaged, it undermines the ability to have basically a global effort because two big players are not being as proactive as some would think. So Canadians definitely take an interest in, it's interesting in polling that we've done with the University of Ottawa's Positive Energy Initiative. It suggests that Canadians are game to be ambitious on climate. I think about 64% think that this is the best time to be ambitious. And that's up from 45% back in June 2020. And this, Michael, is in the context of, is this the best or the worst time to be ambitious on climate change, even if the economy might suffer? So yes, some people are worried, especially if you're in the prairie provinces. But the key takeaway here is that climate ambition is on the rise, and Canadians want to see action. And they're probably looking very carefully at what the Trudeau Liberal government is doing right now.
Nik, I think that's it for our show. Do you have any final thoughts, any predictions or anything as we wrap up?
Yeah, how about this? This is going to be our winter of discontent, Michael. You look at those ballot numbers and no honeymoon for the government. The Conservatives are down. You look at Alberta politics, we're not even talking about a honeymoon. We're talking about a reverse honeymoon in Alberta for Jason Kenney and people looking at the economy, looking at the environment and wondering what might happen and how things can move forward. So winter of discontent. How's that?
Very Shakespearean. I appreciate it. And Nik, where can we find you?
Find me on Twitter at Nik Nanos, Nik Nanos, or go on the web to get all the stats, www.nanos.co.
And I'm on Twitter at Michael Stittle, and you can find more information about what Nik and I have discussed at ctvnews.ca. Thanks for listening.